On Monday, President's Day, in Sarasota, Tampa, Tallahassee, and 12 other cities across the state, there were peaceful protests against the policies of the new Trump administration. As USA Today reported, in Sarasota, more than 1,000 activists peacefully marched from Bayfront Park to the federal building, where they waved signs warning that billionaire Elon Musk has been given too much power and that democracy itself is at stake. A similar-sized demonstration took place in downtown Tampa, where activists warned against deep budget cuts, defended immigrants, called for Palestinian human rights, criticized delving into personal tax records, and said it was time for people to stand up and resist what they described as the dangerous actions taken by Donald Trump.
My biggest fear right now is that we are in a constitutional crisis and that it's a coup being taken over by oligarchs, and that if we go to a certain point, we won't be able to turn back. We have to act quickly to get something done because they're dividing. I feel like the Republican Party is dividing us with culture wars, and I'm concerned about the culture wars, but I'm really concerned that we may lose our right to even vote.
And joining us now, Eric Deggans is an author and the TV and media analyst for National Public Radio. State Representative Bernie Jacques represents parts of Pinellas County and is a Republican. State Representative Michelle Rayner represents parts of Hillsborough and Pinellas counties and is a Democrat. And Tramel Gomes is a journalist and the president of Gomes Media Strategies. Nice to have all of you here. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So, Bernie, I want to start with you. What do you make of the protests around the state against the president's policies?
Well, look, these folks that are protesting are clearly not part of the majority of Americans who actually elected President Donald J. Trump to do exactly what he is doing. And it is refreshing to actually see a president follow through on his campaign promises. And central to these promises was his pledge to crack down on illegal immigration, to reform government by rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse, thus Doge and Elon Musk efforts. And so, although they are protesting, they are not in sync with the majority of Americans. And I mean that sincerely, because the majority of the voters went with Donald J. Trump. This is a man who won the popular vote and, of course, the Electoral College, and he is acting and making good on the mandate that he was given.
So, Michelle, let me go to you. This week, CNN and the Washington Post both had polls showing the president's poll numbers were dropping. What do you make of the polls, and what do you make of what Bernie Jacques said about the president having support from the majority of the country?
I mean, I think Representative Jacques, you know, he's a colleague of mine and a friend. Yes, I mean, that is a fact. You know, he won the popular vote. He won the Electoral College. I think that people, even folks who supported him, are really beginning to see the impact of their decision, which is why you're having folks who initially supported him, you know, who are now protesting, who are now, saying, hey, wait, I didn't know it was going to be like this. I don't know how they didn't know, because when someone tells you who they are, you should believe them. And I think ultimately, you know, people elected Donald Trump. They didn't elect Elon Musk. They didn't elect this, you know, person to come in and basically be a pseudo president. And so people are exercising their right to protest. And I think that we're going to continue to see a surge of that. And I hopefully in the midterm elections, there will be a turning of the tide.
Eric, the president did promise that he was going to cut the size of government. He seems to be doing that. How are those cuts being received outside of Washington, D.C.?
Well, I think one thing that's happening is that people don't understand the thinking behind many of the cuts. And we've seen situations where tons of people have been laid off from offices, and then they've had to hire them back once they've realized that the things that they did were important. And so there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to some of the cuts that we've seen. I would push back against this idea that a majority of Americans elected Donald Trump. A majority of Americans did not elect Donald Trump. A majority of the people who voted elected Donald Trump. And there were a lot of Americans who didn't vote. There were a lot of people who supported Joe Biden in 2020 who didn't vote. And you know, he got 78 million votes or so. There's 350 million people who live in this country, or 330 million people who live in this country. And in years past, we've always had the sense that once a president is elected, they understand that they are president for everyone. who lives in America, not just their supporters. And so I think one of the things that we're seeing now is that people are saying we want a president who is president for everyone, not just a president who pursues the goals of the oligarchs who supported them, and this very, you know, cohesive base and what they want, regardless of how it impacts people who are not part of that base.
Tramel, what do you make of the protests around the state? There was one in Tallahassee where you're based.
There's a groundswell of protests, and I've been fortunate to be traveling a lot this week from Ohio to New York, Washington, and there were protests in all of these states and cities. And it's growing, and I'm not sure the Trump administration is going to be able to contain with a PR strategy to help calm things. People are not seeing or feeling the relief Trump promised. Instead, they're seeing public servants, as just mentioned, doing very important, critical work for the federal government lose their livelihoods. The price of eggs have increased, and people are just wondering what's going on. So the protests are growing, and we're waiting to see what the Trump plan is as far as trying to provide that relief. But so far, the messaging is not there.